Thousands took to the streets to mourn the death of President Raisi today. The funeral procession will go to 5 cities. There were celebrations too in some parts of the country, and it basically sums up his legacy. Tonight we'll talk about the succession race that his death has triggered and the many conspiracy theories doing the round. So much so that officials in the US and Israel are clarifying. We'll tell you all about it. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has talked about the ICC, about the arrest warrant that they may issue against Benjamin Netanyahu, and his statement exposes his hypocrisy. In Africa, Zimbabwe has signed a $500 million deal with China. We'll discuss why it's a risk. In Russia, they're planning a major upgrade and comeback for their navy should the West be worried. In India, the stock market boom has left the government worried about the growing risk appetite of the Indian investor. Why OpenAI is caught in a legal battle with Scarlett Johansson, why a road accident in Pune has triggered a tsunami of reactions in India, and what is intuitive eating, an anti-diet trend that is going viral. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. China complains to the United States after its Secretary of State congratulated Taiwan's new president. Beijing says Antony Blinken's message violated the One China principle. Beijing considers self-ruled Taiwan as part of its territory. Washington is Taiwan's most important partner and its biggest arms supplier. Finland proposes a new border law to block migrants. Last year, Helsinki saw a surge in migrants along its border with Russia. Finland claims this migration surge has been orchestrated by Moscow. In December, the Nordic country closed its border with Russia. Severe turbulence on a Singapore Airlines flight kills a 73-year-old British man. 18 others had to be hospitalized. Many more were injured. The London to Singapore flight had to make an emergency landing in Bangkok. There were more than 200 passengers on board. India shuts schools in its capital as temperatures soar. Schools in Delhi told to declare summer vacation till the 30th of June. A heatwave alert has been issued in the national capital for the next 4 days. In the last few days, temperatures in Delhi have soared above 46 degrees Celsius. And should children under 16 be banned from social media? Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese thinks so. He's endorsed banning children from having social media accounts until they are 16. The Prime Minister says online engagement at a young age can damage mental health.
امیدواریم خداوند متعال
زین واژگو سلام الله gedim balalarını.
The streets of Iran were filled with people today. Thousands of them showed up to pay their respects to President Ebrahim Raisi and his aides. They died in a helicopter crash on Sunday. The regime is calling them martyrs. They've declared 5 days of mourning. There's a show of unity and solidarity in the honor of the departed. But behind the scenes, a succession battle is brewing. Iran has entered a period of more uncertainty. We'll discuss that tonight, starting with a recap of today's events. It was the day of funerals. The first ceremony took place in Tabriz, the region where Raisi's chopper crashed on Sunday. This is going to be a 3-day-long funeral. The procession will travel to 5 different cities. The final stop will be in Mashhad in northeast Iran. This is the president's birthplace, President Raisi's birthplace. This is where his remains will be laid to rest on Thursday. Iranian state TV released these pictures today. A crowd surrounded the vehicle carrying the coffins of President Ebrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian, and 8 other aides who were with them. The coffins were draped in the Iranian flag. The mourners were clearly supporters of the regime.
We were very saddened by the crash of the plane of our president and foreign minister. He worked hard for the country, and this news was really unfortunate.
As an Iranian, I am very upset and sad that the president was martyred. He worked hard for the country and now he is no longer among us.
That's the sentiment shared by many Iranians, but certainly not all of them, because in some parts of the country there were celebrations. These are pictures from inside Iran. They show people celebrating on the streets, distributing sweets and setting off fireworks. A few even mocked Raisi on social media. They started a hashtag, Fall of the Butcher. That's a reference to Raisi, who was also called the Butcher of Tehran. He earned this nickname in the 1980s. That's when he served as a prosecutor in Tehran. He was part of a judicial commission. He had ordered the execution of thousands of critics, hence the name, the Butcher of Tehran. In 2021, when he became president, Raisi doubled down on these hardline policies. He tightened the morality laws of Iran. In 2022, he faced one of the largest protests in the history of the country. The death of 22-year-old Masha Amini sparked a mass uprising. She was killed in the custody of Iran's morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. The death sparked anger and outrage. President Raisi's response was a bloody crackdown. It led to the death of more than 500 protesters. Throughout this crisis, the president proved to be a trusted hand of the regime. He was personally mentored by Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, Khamenei is 85 years old, so it was believed that Raisi would succeed him, that he would become Iran's next supreme leader. He had all the right credentials according to the religious regime, but his death has upended all those plans. With him gone, it's not clear who will succeed Ayatollah Khamenei. The next few weeks would be crucial. The decisions taken now will shape the future of Iran as well as that of the regime. As per the rules, fresh elections have been called. Raisi's successor will be picked on the 28th of June. Nominations will be filed between the 30th of May and the 3rd of June. And this will be a crucial election for Iran because the next president may also become the next supreme leader. And who would that person be? Many observers are putting their money on this man, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the current supreme leader of Iran. Mojtaba is a mid-level cleric, and he is being widely viewed as a potential successor. We told you about this yesterday, but in the last 24 hours, more names have emerged, like Saeed Jalili. He's a well-known hardliner. Jalili was part of President Raisi's inner circle, so the hardliners could decide to rally around him. Then we have someone called Mehrdad Bazarpash. His name is also doing the rounds. He's the current Minister of Roads and Urban Development. Why is he a contender? Bazarpash is believed to have the backing of powerful and wealthy lawmakers, so he could emerge as a serious candidate for this top job. But these men and others can only try. Eventually, there is only one deciding factor. Whoever gets the blessing of Iran's supreme leader wins this contest. Elections in this country are not decided by the ballot box. They're often sealed behind closed doors by the powerful Guardian Council. It's a 12-member panel, the Guardian Council. It oversees the entire election process. More importantly, it approves which candidate can run. And the members of this council are approved by the supreme leader. So whichever way you look at it, the ultimate power rests with him. Without his endorsement, winning an election in Iran is almost impossible. Now the world is waiting to see which man he picks. A mysterious chopper crash, an hours-long search, and a dead president. It's what conspiracy theorists live for. You can spin it any way you want. Some are blaming Israel, some are blaming the US, and some are even blaming space lasers. It's all very absurd and baseless, but right now it could also be dangerous. We are talking about a nervous regime here. A regime with many enemies around the world, so the goal should be clarity, not conspiracies. At the same time, it's important to keep track of what's being said, even though some of these claims are absolutely wild. Let's show you theory number one, a Mossad hit job. Mossad is Israel's spy agency. They're famous for James Bond-style operations, so many social media accounts say Mossad did it. And Mossad have taken out Iranian officials in the past, including nuclear scientists. But taking out a president is high risk. It's an open act of war. Hamas accounts say the chopper's pilot was Israeli, a Mossad agent, wait for it, a Mossad agent named Helicopter. A few news channels, in fact, fell for it. But frankly, it's a stretch. Israel gains nothing by killing Raisi in the middle of a war. It would actually be counterproductive. Nonetheless, Israel is worried about these reports. One of their officials has even reacted. He had just one thing to say: it wasn't us. And it's important to set the record straight because conspiracy theories get a life of their own. Which brings us to the second theory: a US hand. Again, there is precedent here. The Americans have a history of hit jobs overseas, which is why Washington is in damage control.
The United States had no part to play in that crash, and that's a fact, plain and simple. It could be a number of things: mechanical failure, pilot error, you name it. So.
How about that? Iran has not blamed the US for the crash, yet Washington says it wasn't us. Again, chances are they're right. Joe Biden is struggling to contain one war in West Asia. It's unlikely he would start a second one. Having said that, the US does have an indirect role in this. Raisi was flying an old American helicopter, a Bell 212 model from the 1960s. Now, aircraft require regular maintenance and repairs, but Iran couldn't do that. Why? Because of Western sanctions. So some Iranians do hold the US responsible for their president's death. Like former Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, listen to what he said. One of the culprits behind yesterday's tragedy is the United States, because of its sanctions that bar Iran from procuring essential aviation parts. Well, on paper, he's right, but the sanctions did not come from thin air. It was the result of Iran's nuclear program, so blaming the US does not really help, and you had decades to look for alternatives or build your own. Now let's look at theory number 3. An internal power struggle. Raisi was expected to succeed Ayatollah Khamenei as Iran's supreme leader, but now they need a replacement. A lot of pundits are betting on this man, like we told you, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Iran's current supreme leader. The question is, did his supporters sabotage Raisi's chopper? Well, he certainly had the motive. Look at what a former US advisor on Iran has said. I'm quoting again. Internal pundits had believed the competition to succeed Khamenei as supreme leader was down to Mojtaba and Raisi. If Raisi is dead, Mojtaba becomes heir apparent. I know, very Game of Thrones. But motive alone is not enough. You need the means to pull something off. Khamenei handpicked Raisi to become Iran's president, to possibly even succeed him. Would his son dare to kill that protege? Again, highly unlikely. Mojtaba's claim is already a bit weak. Most regime loyalists do not like the idea of hereditary succession. So even Raisi's death does not assure his elevation. Which brings us to the last theory, theory number 4, and probably the weirdest of them all. Space lasers. A lot of social media accounts are posting this. They claim that Raisi's chopper was shot down using lasers. Needless to say, it's fake. But why space lasers? Because it's a popular anti-Semitic trope. Let me take you back to 2018. The US state of California was hit by wildfires. Most experts said climate change made it worse, but one politician had a different take. Her name was Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's a far-right Republican. And she said that Jewish space lasers caused these wildfires. And since then, others have picked it up. It has become a popular anti-Semitic trope. Like I said, all this sounds absurd, even borderline funny. But we should not let these theories fester. What if they rally public opinion in Iran? What if the regime buys into them? These are all very risky scenarios, which is why Israel and the US were quick to set the record straight. They did not wait for Iran to blame them. They preemptively rejected all of it. The question is, how can we stop these theories from blowing up? Well, that depends on Iran. They're investigating the helicopter crash. Let's hope they find the actual cause. It was most likely a technical issue or bad weather. Once Iran confirms it officially, we can breathe a sigh of relief. Until then, it's conspiracy theory central. Vantage continues after a short break.
Though a White House spokesperson said Raisi had blood on his hands for supporting extremist groups in the region. An Israeli official who requested anonymity told Reuters it was not involved in the crash, while the U.S. said it played no role either.
Staying with West Asia, let's turn to Iran's sworn enemy, Israel. Their prime minister is facing an arrest warrant. From whom? The ICC, the International Criminal Court. Its chief prosecutor has asked for an arrest warrant. If the judges agree, it will be issued. But what does an ICC warrant mean? Technically, it's like any arrest warrant. You see him, you arrest him. But not every country accepts the ICC's jurisdiction. The likes of Russia, the US and India do not accept it, but 124 nations do. And this includes Israel's allies like France, Austria, Germany and Italy. Those countries will have to arrest Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on their soil. It could limit his ability to travel, which is why Netanyahu is furious. He's launching personal attacks at the ICC prosecutor.
Through this incendiary decision, Mr. Khan takes his place among the great anti-Semites in modern times. He now stands alongside those infamous German judges who donned their robes and upheld laws that denied the Jewish people their most basic rights and enabled the Nazis to perpetrate the worst crime in history.
Very sharp words there, but Netanyahu only has himself to blame. He had many opportunities to end this war. His allies asked him to stop. His friends and partners urged caution, yet Netanyahu pushed on. So there is no point blaming the ICC prosecutor now. The same ICC also issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Now I know every war is devastating, but Israel's war is much deadlier than Russia's. More children have died in Gaza than across conflict zones in the last 4 years. So simply put, Netanyahu had it coming. But this story goes beyond the arrest warrant. It also extends to the reactions, to the so-called guardians of the world order. When it suits them, they talk about rules and fairness. When it doesn't, they reject them. I'm talking about the United States of America. President Joe Biden is fuming at the ICC. He says Israel is actually protecting Gazan civilians.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection.
That's news for us. Until recently, Joe Biden said Israel was not protecting civilians. Now he says they are protecting civilians. So which one is it? And Biden's hypocrisy does not end there. Let me take you back to March 2023. The ICC had issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. Listen to Joe Biden's reaction then.
Could you give us your reaction to the International Criminal Court issuing an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin?
Well, I think it's justified, but the question is, it's not recognized internationally by us either. But I think it makes a very strong point.
How about that? When the warrant is for Vladimir Putin, it is justified. It makes a strong point. But when it's for Netanyahu, it's outrageous. And honestly, this does not surprise us. The US always picks and chooses which rules to follow. They do not accept the ICC's jurisdiction, yet they're helping the ICC's probe against Putin. Why? Because it suits them. And forget the politics for a moment. Think about the optics. Many countries trust the ICC to make unbiased decisions. It's like a last resort for them. They cannot stand up to big powers and bullies, so they trust the International Criminal Court. And what does the US do? They make a mockery of it in public. So next time Biden talks about a rules-based order, remember this. Always ask yourself, whose rules? Internationally agreed rules or America's own rules? Of course, this whole debate is pinned on one question. Will the judges issue a warrant for Netanyahu? Well, the evidence is there. Most UN agencies have criticized Israel's war. They've also documented major crimes like collective punishment, attack on aid workers, and the targeting of hospitals. If they issued a warrant for Putin, then they're likely to issue one for Netanyahu. You heard his reaction to the whole thing. It was very aggressive and personal, and there's a reason for that. Many Western allies are wary of disobeying the ICC.
If charges were brought against someone, we're not in the habit of having political discussions about how we think it should end. We stand up for the rules. We want to live in a rules-based world.
But of course, the court is the court, and Sweden always upholds the multilateral system, and that also needs to be said very clearly.
Where the member states have said very much that the European Union supports the ICC for its central role in bringing justice to victims in all situations under its jurisdiction.
This warrant is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it has united Israel's coalition. The opposition is now backing Prime Minister Netanyahu again, so is the United States. But the question is for how long? The warrants may not end with Netanyahu. As the case drags on, more Israeli officials could get pulled up, like war cabinet members or military leaders or intelligence officials. And all this pressure will find its way to Netanyahu. His biggest weapon has been the ideological difference between Israel and Hamas. Hamas, a terror group, Israel, a democracy. He used that distinction to deflect blame. But these warrants are shattering that difference. It's something Israel cannot afford. Our next story is from Africa, from Zimbabwe in the south. The country is planning a railway overhaul, and it has decided to go to China for help. Zimbabwe has signed a deal with the Trans-Tech Engineering Corporation. It's a subsidiary of the China Railway Group. The deal is worth $533 million. The hope is that it will breathe new life into Zimbabwe's ailing railways. So first, let's look at the present situation. This is Zimbabwe, a landlocked country in southern Africa. The country has massive mineral reserves. From high-value minerals like lithium and chrome to basics like coal, Zimbabwe has it all. But it's one thing to have mineral wealth and another to be able to profit from it. Zimbabwe has been struggling with that second part. Because even if it extracts the minerals, without transportation, they're gathering dust or going up in smoke, literally. Take this report from last month. It talks about Zimbabwe's coal industry and how it suffers due to poor railway infrastructure. Coal companies are sitting on large stockpiles and they cannot move them. These stockpiles actually spontaneously combust while waiting for transportation. It highlights the problem. Abundant supplies, but no way to address them. That is why Zimbabwe wants to refurbish its railways. Back in the 1990s, when Zimbabwe's rail network was still mostly functional, it transported 18 million tons of freight annually. In 2023, it transported just 2.2 million tons. That's less than 15% of its prime capacity. So what happened here? The simple answer is neglect. Zimbabwe's railway system is over a century old. It was built by the British, just like they built the railways in India and other former colonies. This wasn't charity, though. It was to better exploit the colonies. And once the British got the boot in 1980, Zimbabwe was on its own. That's when they got independence, 1980. And it managed fine for a few years. Then the rail system's age began to show, and the country did not invest in modernization. Over time, the system has fallen to near ruin. Now, Zimbabwe is seeking to revive it. And look at how they plan to do it. With the help of the Chinese. These two countries have a long history of working together. Unfortunately, Zimbabwe has not learned from that history. After it became independent, it was sanctioned by the West. Its government was accused of unfairly treating the white minority population. So Zimbabwe turned to China for help. It knew that Beijing would not give it lectures. This new railway deal is an extension of that old relationship, even if it comes with obvious risks, like the Chinese terms and conditions. You see, Zimbabwe is not the only country where China wants to improve railroads. In nearby Zambia and Tanzania, China is planning to spend $1 billion. This was announced in February. China will revamp a rail line linking Zambian mines to the Indian Ocean. This is to secure access to minerals, the same as with Zimbabwe. But China is not satisfied with just the minerals of Zambia. It also wants to take over the railways of Zambia under a system called Rehabilitate, Operate and Transfer. China will revamp the railway line, and in exchange, it will control the railways for 20 to 25 years. Will Zimbabwe be fine with a similar deal? Is it willing to hand over its rail system to China? Have they done it already? Zimbabwe has been dealing with the Chinese for years. It has not brought great prosperity to the country, despite numerous deals. Why is that? Because when it comes to Beijing, the devil is in the details. There won't be any judgment or lecture, but there's always a price to pay. So the people of Zimbabwe should be wary of what they've signed up for. Vantage continues after a short break.
لذا فرمودن سوره فجر رو بخونید. امام صادق فرمودن الصدیق الشهید
همتی از پرتو خورشید حق ما خادمان ملت غریب بذار که بی پرده بگم امام رضا دیوونتم یا حسین.
خب از این خبر همه ناراحت شدیم. بالاخره یک رئیس جمهور مردمی و یک رئیس جمهور خستگی ناپذیرمون از دست دادیم و انشالله که خدا به مردم ایران صبر بده. برادر بزرگوارم آقا حنیف طاهری عزیز. مطمئنا دشمنان سوء استفاده خودشونو میخوان بکنن. خبرهای امروز اسرائیل، آمریکا و انگلیس خودشون رو نشون دادن، همونطور که در موضوعات دیگر در این کشور اتفاق افتاده خودشون رو نشون دادن و مطمئنا ملت ایران قوی‌تر و بهتر نسبت به گذشته انشالله پیش خواهیم رفت.
با همه گیر و گرفتاریاشون پای خادمای شما ایستادن.
قطعاً میتونه مدیریت کنه. ما از این مراحل سخت‌تر هم داشتیم. اولین رئیس جمهور شهیدمون نبوده. مطمئناً هم از این حادثه با همیشه سربلند رد میشیم.
و حرف پیام این ملت رو چجوری به همه دنیا رسون؟
Now let's shift our attention to Russia. With the election out of the way, Vladimir Putin has found a new project, making the Russian military stronger. The focus is on the Russian Navy. The force has suffered during the war with Ukraine. Moscow is now planning some big upgrades, big naval upgrades. This year, Russia plans to launch a dozen new surface warships and 4 new submarines. Now, the West is already struggling to supply Ukraine with weapons. Russia's expanded navy could become a new headache for them. Our next report tells you why.
This is a Ukrainian naval drone, and they have been troubling the Russian Navy on the battlefield. They openly hunt the Russian Navy so far. They have proven to be effective by March this year. These drones had sunk 5 Russian vessels and caused serious damage to others. Moscow is planning some reinforcements. This year, the Russian Navy will receive some new toys: 12 surface warships and 4 submarines. These deliveries will be a major boost. Russian officials say these vessels will be 100% made in Russia. Western sanctions cut off Russia's access to the international markets. Ship makers have found it hard to procure the parts they need. But the sanctions accelerated Russia's push towards self-sufficiency. Russian officials say they have achieved total self-reliance. This has been a priority for the Russian president since last year. He has been pushing to build up the strength of the Russian Navy. In December alone, he had traveled to Russia's far north and unveiled 2 new nuclear submarines. He had promised to add more such weapons to Russia's arsenal. These formidable missile carriers, unparalleled in their class, begin their service in our Navy. We are consistently equipping the Navy with the most modern equipment and weapons, and, let me emphasize, we are increasing serial production. So far, Russia appears to be on track. The Russian Navy could be well on its way towards restoring its might on the high seas. For the Western powers, that's a problem. In the short term, Russia's new naval assets could be deployed in the Black Sea region, where Ukraine has managed to keep the Russian forces at bay. This has enabled Ukraine to continue with its exports without any major disruption. A surge in Russian deployments may complicate the situation. Ukrainian forces may find themselves fighting on a new front. Already, they are stretched. Ukraine's weapon supplies have been shrinking, and fresh supplies from the West are yet to reach the front lines. Zelensky has been pressuring his Western allies to speed up the deliveries.
Every decision to which we all together eventually arrive at comes about 1 year late. This is my view. This is how things are.
However, for the West, Russia's growing naval fleet presents a bigger challenge. Moscow could use the new naval resources to strengthen its presence in regions like the Arctic. Leading nations, from the United States to China, are vying to build their influence there. Thanks to the Arctic's rich reserves of natural resources, they could be worth over $1 trillion. Experts often point out that the high seas could be the next battleground. And Russia seems to be preparing for that possibility.
It was a big day for Indian markets. The indices closed flat, but not before setting a new record. The Indian stock market has hit $5 trillion. It's a very important feat. Only 4 stock markets have reached this figure: Hong Kong, China, the US and Japan. So India is the 5th to reach here. But what does this $5 trillion stand for? It's market capitalization, basically the value of all stocks listed in India, $5 trillion. Today that value reached $5 trillion. It's certainly a moment to celebrate, but it's also a moment to introspect. There's a lot of interest in the Indian markets. And I don't mean foreign investors. They are expert traders. They know how to navigate tricky situations. I'm talking about ordinary Indian investors, people who are putting their savings in the market. It's a new phenomenon in India. Traditionally, Indians have been wary of the stock market. They think it's too risky and volatile. Instead, they preferred safer options like a bank deposit or gold. But nowadays, that trend is changing. Just look at the number of demat accounts. A quick side note, a demat account is like a special purse. It holds all your shares and securities. If you want to invest in the stock market, you need a demat account. Around 32 million of these accounts, 32 million demat accounts were opened in the last financial year. It was a new record for India. Overall, there are 150 million demat accounts. So Indians are investing more than ever before. There are two reasons for that. One, young Indians are more enthusiastic. They're not happy with meager returns. They like quick money. And two, buying stocks is now easier than ever. There are so many mobile applications available. You can just download and invest. Now I know what you're thinking. What's wrong with this? Isn't investing in the market a good thing? Well, yes, it is. Investing is good. But the markets offer a lot more than that. For example, derivatives. These are not shares. These are financial contracts, sort of like an agreement to buy or sell, and it doesn't have to be today. The contract can be for a future date or price. I know it sounds complicated, but just know this. Derivatives are a lot more risky than shares, especially if you're new to it. Indian regulators have done some studies and they found that 90% of the active traders lose their money in derivatives, so the government is spooked.
Any unchecked explosion in retail trading of futures and options can create future challenges, not just for the markets, for the investor sentiment, and also for household finances. Household finances have made a generational shift, which I just explained. We want to safeguard that.
If it's so risky, why are people doing it? Because the reward is equally big. India's derivatives trading is worth $6 trillion. That's a six-fold increase from 2022. So my point is quite simple. Investing in the markets is good, but don't jump into the deep end. Study the markets, understand how they work, gauge the risks, and get good advice. And that last one is very important, especially in the age of finfluencers. These are influencers who give financial advice. It's quite shady stuff. What if a company has paid an influencer to promote a stock? What if the influencers themselves have bought the stock? What if the advice is just baseless? These are all genuine risks. India's market regulator SEBI has cracked down on some of them. A few of them have been fined, others have been barred from the markets, but a lot more needs to be done. The law says only licensed people can give out advice. But here's the problem. Finfluencers or financial influencers do not have offices with boards saying financial advice. They work online. There are thousands of them in India, so finding and regulating them is hard. Nonetheless, SEBI is trying. Reports say they're preparing new rules for social media. The idea is to regulate finfluencers, to make them register before giving advice. It will be a long and drawn-out process. Still, it must be done. More and more Indians are entering the market, so it's important to protect their money, to make sure they know the risks involved. I guess the focus must be on awareness, like creating more advertisements or integrating in school syllabus. If not, people may lose interest and trust in the markets, and amid a boom, that's the last thing you want. Vantage continues after a short break.
نوکرای امام حسین میخوان بخونن به این زن بدن اما برای هممونه.
تو روابط تونیس رو اصلاح کن به تعبیر مولا امیرالمومنین.
Ve burada görüyorsunuz helikopterin
میتونه یک راه بسیار خوب امنی رو برای ترانزیت کالا برای
نظام هیچ خللی ایجاد نمیکنه. این حادثه سنگینیه برای همه ما، در حقیقت مورد تأسف و تأثر.
انشاءالله خود سربازان شهید سلیمانی این کار رو انجام خواهند داد.
Helikopterin parçaları burada.
Debris and mangled metal can be seen wedged between trees at a site said to be the wreckage of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi's helicopter on Monday. The footage from a Turkish broadcaster showed parts of the destroyed aircraft in a misty, forested area. Officials in state media on Monday said Raisi, a hardliner seen as a potential successor to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed along with 6 others aboard the helicopter after it crashed in poor weather in mountains near the Azerbaijan border.
For our next story, let's talk about a feather. It sold for more than $28,000 in New Zealand. That makes it even more valuable than gold. But what's so special about this feather? It belongs to the huio bird. It's a native to New Zealand. It is important to the Maori culture. It's almost like a national treasure. But the huio went extinct in 1907, and that makes its remains a collector's item. People are willing to pay millions for items linked to extinct species. But is that good for science? Should they just become a showpiece in someone's house? Our next story explores.
This is the huia. It has vibrant orange wattles, shiny black feathers, and its tail feathers have a white tip. The bird has a special place in New Zealand's heart. It's significant in Maori culture. It was already a rare bird to begin with. But with the Europeans coming in, there was a craze for its feathers. They hunted down the birds, and it led to the extinction of the huia. The last one was sighted around 1907. But while the bird may be long gone, its tail feathers have become a collector's item, prized for their historical and cultural significance. This one recently sold for $28,000. That makes it the most expensive feather to ever be sold. It weighs around 9 grams. That's around 5,169 per gram. By that estimate, it's even more valuable than gold. But what makes it so special? Well, many things. First, this feather is in excellent condition. It has retained its colors. It wasn't damaged by insects. Plus, it was preserved well. That, mixed with the sentiment related to the huia, drove up the price. But the auction did have a condition. The feather can't leave New Zealand. Highly prized items related to extinct species often fetch a lot of money. Like this dodo skeleton. It fetched nearly $500,000. The dodo is a flightless bird that lived on the island of Mauritius. It became extinct in the late 17th century, and that makes it a valuable piece of natural history. Just like the saber-toothed tiger skeleton. It's 40 million years old, around 4 feet long. These cats lived in the Americas and went extinct around 10,000 years ago. Similar to this rare Tasmanian tiger pelt. It was worth $250,000. Then there are fossilized dinosaur eggs. Those fetch close to $100,000 at auctions. But it's not the money that these items fetch that raises questions. It's the way they are sold. These items are a crucial part of natural history. But the high price tag creates some unwitting problems. Because skeletons are being smuggled. They are being sold over the internet. That way, they can end up in auctions and fetch ridiculous amounts of money. But scientists warn that these are finite resources. They are crucial to science. With such sales and sky-high prices, they just end up as an ornament in someone's living room.
Food is a basic human need, yet figuring out what to eat can be a complicated task. You must play a game of rapid fire. What should you eat? Should you go out or cook for yourself? What can you afford? Do you have time to prepare food? Do you have the right groceries? What is healthy, and should you care? Welcome to adulthood. This is going to be your life forever, and if things weren't messy already, prepare yourself for a hawkish culinary culture where certain foods are worshipped while others are vilified, and restrictive diets are celebrated. This pressure can be unpalatable, but there is a saving grace. intuitive eating. This diet trend is all the rage now. There are books, over 1 billion mentions on TikTok, and celebrity recommendations. And before you scoff, know that this diet trend is the farthest thing from dieting. In fact, intuitive eating is an anti-diet movement. So what is it? What is intuitive eating? It's a dietary approach based on one simple idea. Your body already knows what it needs. So intuitive eating focuses on a person's internal hunger cues. There is no eating plan, no calorie counting, no list of acceptable foods. You get to decide what you want to eat. I know this sounds like a chapter in the anarchist cookbook or a 10-year-old mastermind's proposition. You may as well eat pizza till you pass out and tear down health initiatives for children. But intuitive eating is not an all-you-can-eat permission. At its core, this approach is about intuition, about relying on your body, knowing what kinds of food feel good and how much of it you should eat. And science proves that this intuition exists. Junk food activates reward systems in the brain. It feels good in the moment, but it is not satisfying for long. Overeating or eating only junk does not feel good physically. It doesn't feel good mentally either, because human bodies want nourishing food. So intuitive dieting or eating balances nutrition with desires, or so they say, and it can be healthy for you, both physically and mentally. Studies say this improves blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol levels. But it may not help you lose weight if that's what you're looking for. Most of its benefits are psychological. According to studies, it improves body image, self-esteem, and well-being. It reduces the guilt and shame around diets and creates more brain space to actually eat healthy. Intuitive eaters are more likely to eat fruits and vegetables and less likely to engage in harmful behaviors like taking diet pills or binge eating. Now, this may sound like woke propaganda. After all, this trend is a hit among Gen Z, but it may also be the need of the hour. 1 in 5 young people show signs of disordered eating worldwide because diet culture is ingrained in the modern society, so much so that research says that girls as young as 5 restrict their diets. 62% of younger women worry about their weight regularly, as do 40% of younger men. Yet, there is no winning. Chronic dieting sets us up to fail. It comes with strict rules. If you break one rule, all bets are off, and chances are you end up overeating. This takes a huge psychological toll. It is linked to depression, anxiety, and poor physical health. So it's a vicious cycle. Diet, cheat, give up, repeat. Because society rarely teaches us how to have a healthy relationship with food. Eating without rules feels risky. And as with most things in life, limits are crucial. But you don't have to police food. Also, intuitive eating may not work for everyone, but it can teach us how to understand our own impulses and quieten them. So my point is quite simple. When it comes to eating, sticks don't work. It's time we turn to carrots instead. And now it's time for Vantage Shorts, images that tell the story. In France, railway workers go on strike ahead of the Olympics, calling for more bonuses. In Iceland, successive volcanic eruptions disrupt tourism in the country. And a spectacular butterfly boom lures nature's lovers to China's Yunnan. Finally, we're taking you back in history on this day in 1991. Former Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated. Gandhi was campaigning in Tamil Nadu for the elections when he was killed by a suicide bomber. The bomber was linked to Sri Lankan Tamil terror group LTTE. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
holds ultimate power with a final say on foreign policy and Iran's nuclear program, announced 5 days of public mourning and said First Vice President Mohammad Makbar would take over as interim president. In the first cabinet meeting after the crash, the acting leader vowed the incident would not interrupt the government's operations.
This
is a serious incident for all of us. It is sad and upsetting. But in the interests of the country and our people, we won't have any disruption. The country will continue moving forward under this leadership. Everyone should continue on with their roles despite this incident. In no way will this tragic incident interfere with the government and the running of our country.
The crash comes at a time of growing dissent within Iran over an array of political, social, and economic crises. Iran's clerical rulers face international pressure over Tehran's disputed nuclear program and its deepening military ties with Russia during the war in Ukraine. Iranians in exile in Berlin celebrated the president's death, while the head of a Paris-based Iranian opposition group told Reuters that Raisi's death represents an enormous and serious strategic blow to the mullah's supreme leader Ali Khamenei and the entire regime. The United Nations held a moment of silence for Raisi Monday, while leaders around the globe expressed their condolences, including Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan, who said earlier it sent rescue teams to assist, while even the U.S. offered to help after receiving a request from Iran, according to State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
I'm not going to get into the details, but we were asked by the Iranian government for assistance. We said that we would be willing to assist. It's something that we would do with respect to any government in this situation. Ultimately, largely for logistical reasons, we weren't able to provide that assistance.
The U.S. government offered condolences.
In a battle of alliances, will personal equations spoil chances? Join me, Smita Prakash, for the most dynamic and distinct coverage, unrivaled political punditry, and the sharpest election analysis. Elections is equal to CNN News 18.
Iranian people, though a White House spokesperson said Raisi had blood on his hands for supporting extremist groups in the region. An Israeli official who requested anonymity told Reuters it was not involved in the crash, while the U.S. said it played no role either.
Will the southern states be the opposition's trump card in these elections? Join me, Sumant C. Raman, for the most dynamic and distinct election coverage, unrivaled political punditry, and the sharpest election analysis.
لذا فرمودن سوره فجر رو بخونید. امام صادق فرمودن
اند همتی از پرتو خورشید حق ما خادمان ملت غریب بذار که بی پرده بگم امام رضا دیوونتم یا حسین.
خب از این خبر همه ناراحت شدیم. بالاخره یک رئیس جمهور مردمی و یک رئیس جمهور خستگی ناپذیرمون رو از دست دادیم و انشالله که خدا به مردم ایران صبر بده.
برادر بزرگوارم آقا حنیف طاهری عزیز.
مطمئنا دشمنان سوء استفاده خودشون رو میخوان بکنن. خبرهای امروز اسرائیل، آمریکا و انگلیس خودشون رو نشون دادن، همونطور که در موضوعات دیگر در این کشور اتفاق افتاده خودشون رو نشون دادن و مطمئنا ملت ایران قوی‌تر و بهتر نسبت به گذشته انشالله پیش خواهیم رفت.
با همه گیر و گرفتاریاشون پای خادمای شما ایستادن.
قطعاً میتونه مدیریت کنه. ما از این مراحل سخت‌تر هم داشتیم. اولین رئیس جمهور شهیدمون نبوده. مطمئناً هم از این
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Ladies and gentlemen, big breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin where the Supreme Court has turned down all the review petitions against the ruling upholding the abrogation of Article 370. The Supreme Court ruled that there was no error in its earlier verdict. Remember, the Supreme Court had ruled that Article 370 was only a temporary provision to ease the accession of the then princely state to the Union at a time of eternal strife and war. That is the piece of breaking news that's coming in, where the Supreme Court has upheld its earlier ruling when it came to the abrogation of Article 370, dismissing all review petitions. I'm joined by my colleague Ananya Bhatnagar on the broadcast to get more details. Ananya, over to you.
Well, definitely it's a big development coming in as far as the abrogation of Article 370 is concerned. The Supreme Court now turning down all kinds of review petitions that were filed. In fact, that judgment that the Supreme Court had pronounced clearly saying that the government's move to actually abrogate the Article 370, which granted a special status to Kashmiris, as completely legal, and said that the complete process of that abrogation was actually fine, and challenging that particular verdict of the topmost court of the country. In fact, a constitution bench of the topmost court of the country, headed by the Chief Justice of India, Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud himself, very clearly pointing out that there was no infirmity with that particular order that was passed by the 5 judges constitution bench. The Supreme Court has now turned down all of those petitions and clearly stated that all of those review petitions are now dismissed.
Right. Thank you, Ananya, for getting us that piece of breaking news. So a huge boost to the government's stand when it comes to the abrogation of Article 370. Former Deputy Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Kavinder Gupta, has reacted on this development coming in from the top court of the country. Listen in.
5 अगस्त 2019 को राज्यसभा और लोकसभा में पूर्ण बहुमत के साथ धारा 370 हटाने का प्रस्ताव पास हुआ था। उसके बाद बहुत सी ऐसी राजनीतिक पार्टियां, कुछ और संगठन सुप्रीम कोर्ट तक गए इसकी वैधता के लिए, लेकिन उस वक्त की याचिका को निरस्त कर दिया गया। आज पुनर्विचार करने की ये याचिका थी, सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उसको निरस्त किया है। स्वाभाविक बात है कि ये लोग हवा में तीर मार रहे हैं।